Everyone, here we are on November the 19th, the Friday before Thanksgiving for us here in the U.S. next week. This is hopefully going to be our last Color My World live video. Today we'll talk about the two skyscrapers that were in month 12, the Eiffel Tower and Centerpoint Tower. We'll talk about assembly of putting the entire quilt together. And I'll answer all the questions that you have. There's a place for you to put questions down, and I'll go look before we end up at any questions that you have. I don't see them on my screen while we're talking, so I'll go look at them and answer those for you. The coming up in December 1st, the blog that I'll write on December 1st will talk about detailed pictures of the quilting that I did on mine, which is very similar to what was done on Wendy's quilt. Wendy had hers quilted by a long armor. I did see her quilt last August, a year ago in Dallas when we had it there. And I'm going to try to get a few more pictures of her border. Her long armor did some really interesting things in her border that I want to be able to show you. And I had photos, but of course, today I can't find them. So I will get those to be able to add those to the blog that'll be on December 1st so we can talk more about the quilting. I really found this to be a quilt that was, I could quilt myself without too much effort. There's a lot of stitch in the ditch. And then not a whole lot of places where really important quilting happens. So this might be one that you want to take on. And it's not that big either to be able to quilt it yourself. So we'll talk much more about that in the blog that I'm going to write that'll go up on December 1st. And then I bet you can see next year's block of the month. Last time we met, I had it turned over and I gave you just a little hint, little piece of it. But I have it turned in its full glory, draped over the chair there, and I'll be happy to answer questions about that too as well. We're going to do a big reveal on December 1st with all the information that you're curious about. There are lots and lots of fabrics in that quilt. It's very scrappy, and so I think you'll find it to be a really fun quilt. And we'll talk more about that on the first live in December, which should be December 3rd. Okay, so I'm going to put up the document camera for a minute. I'm embarrassed to show you my hands. I'm going to get my manicure done tomorrow, so it's just they're a mess right now. So just ignore those. Let me go to the document camera. Okay, so here's the block that I think is the easiest of all of the skyscrapers to do. It's Centerpoint Tower. And it is one that has, again, just like we did last time, section 1 is in 2 parts, and they're joined together here. It's just because the paper is only 8.5 by 11 inches long. So these pieces that had to be longer than that are taped or glued together. So this is piece 1. The 2 pieces of paper that make piece 1. And then the lines are the guideline for bias tape. All of these legs of this big long tower were made with the bias tape that Wendy used for that. So section 1 is 2 pieces of paper put together. Section 2 is this middle section here. And as always, you start with the seam lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, work your way all the way up. And then these little teeny pieces, those are really seams there, and they're little teeny pieces of background in order to give that the shape of the Centerpoint Tower. So that's section 2. And then this is section 3, is this little section down here. Section 4 is the spiky part at the top, and then the 2 5s go on either side. Those are background. There was a question on the forum that someone found this confusing. This little section of H is a light color, and I actually wrote that on my pattern that it was light, and then J and G here are darks. And then there's a little tiny seam. There's this little seam here and a little seam here, very, very little seam, that adds a tiny, tiny little piece of background fabric to put that in there to have the shape. So we've got section 3 added to 4, and then the 2 5s are added. And then finally, of course, you would join all of these together. So this one I thought went together pretty quickly. The one that I thought did not go together particularly quickly and has had some questions about it is the Eiffel Tower. So we'll start. I showed this 2 weeks ago, and we talked about the section 1 is comprised of these two parts. This is background down here, and then these pieces, again, they're lines, placement lines for the bias. You cut these individual bias pieces, put those in place, stitch them down, and then add a separate piece of bias across the top and a curved piece of bias here to cover those raw edges up. Same thing with these lines at the top. There's bias, 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 and then those raw edges get encapsulated into the seam. So this section's not too difficult to do. Section 2, however, can be a little bit confusing. And mine will be even more confusing because I lost a part. I think what happened when I sewed my pieces down on this one with the bias, that when I pulled it off, I tore it into several pieces and ultimately must have thrown it away. But there would be this section here of the legs of the tower there's another one that looks just like that. The trick with this is getting these lined up so that you sew the correct side to the correct side. The middle part of background here, this piece C, the wide parts at the bottom and the narrow parts at the top. The two side pieces of background, it's just the opposite. The wide parts are at the top and the narrow parts are at the bottom. And someone indicated that she couldn't make hers fit, that her section 2 was significantly wider than her section 3. And my guess was that she had put this one in upside down and put the widest part up there. And that wouldn't fit if that were the case. So that's the getting this. The same thing with these little parts here. They're going to be the guidelines for bias to generate those lines, and then they're put in there. Then we got section 3. Section 4 is one long piece with all bias on there. That all generates the cross all the iron in the Eiffel Tower, the cross bars there. And then it's put two pieces of background on either side of it to generate part 4. And then section 5 is pretty straightforward. Again, there's bias lines here and a single bias line in the middle for section 6. So 6 is joined to 5, 4 is then joined to that section, and finally the bottom part gets that all done. So it wasn't hard to do. It was just a little more tedious, and all that bias had to be put in place and then stitched on either side of it. So that's how these pieces all go together. It's just like a big old jigsaw puzzle and trying to get it figured out how the pieces go together. And you don't want to sew them incorrectly if you can help it, because then nothing will fit. So that's the gist of that. Let's talk about assembly now, and I'm going to share my screen for a second and go to a blog that I wrote. It was the November 7th blog about assembly of the quilt top. And the stay stitching can be very helpful here. These pieces that are on the outside edge, and this unit, this belongs to one of my students who's taken a class with me, Evelyn, and she's had her pieces with her, which was great. I could take photographs of them to show you. That's all bias along that outer edge there. She's got a dark background, which is really pretty. And by stay stitching, which just simply means stitching within the seam allowance, not at the 1/4 inch, but less than 1/4 of an inch, with just a regular stitch, not a tight stitch, not a long loose stitch, which would do gathering. You just want to stitch those in place. That will help to prevent stretching that you would get along with that bias. And in this section down here, by doing this stay stitch on the lower edge, and you want to stay stitch it with the wrong side up, so you can see all of those seam allowances. That'll keep the seam allowances where you want them to be. One of the things that happens with seam allowances, and I think I have a picture of that, yeah. When you're sewing with the seam allowances underneath and you can't see it, this happens to be a picture that I had from when I was sewing either the roads, or this might be the original, sewing the middle to the outer section there. But this happens, and I just simply turn my piece over when I'm done sewing the complete circle and look for these. You're going to find a few, even though I've pinned them carefully and think that I've avoided that. I simply take the 2 or 3 seconds it takes to pull out those couple of stitches and then put it back under the machine and finish sewing up, get those seams flat the way they're supposed to be, whether these were pushed in this direction. Some of the seams are open depending on, let me look at Evelyn's again. I don't see any open right there, but she may have some that were open, and I know I had some that were open on mine. So the stay stitching is a big help that'll save you a lot of trouble. The other thing that the stay stitching helps with is if those seams start to come apart, you're going to handle this. The whole pinning of this process took me well over an hour to pin that outside complete ring of tall buildings, little houses in the city, and the skyscrapers, to get that completely pinned in place to the middle part of the quilt, which has the upper road is on the outside edge. That took time and a lot of handling it. And you can have those seams start to come apart. And there's nothing more frustrating than when you're trying to sew the seam and you find that the seam has opened up by more than a quarter. It's a half an inch or more open. You have to stop what you're doing, take it back, put it under the needle, and sew it down again. So the stay stitching will prevent that from happening as well. So that's important. Let's talk for a second, and I'm just going to use mine here as a guide so that you can see what I'm talking about, is the size of the circle, the middle circle, that it was the small house, Mariner's Compass in the middle, the lower road, the small houses that we made in the earlier months, and the upper road on the outside. In a perfect world, from raw edge to raw edge in all directions, that should be 43.5 inches. And that means that when you've put this outside ring together, all of this, that hole in the middle needs to be 43.5. It actually needs to be 42.5 if you were going to be perfectly careful to measure it, because the seam allowances take a part of that. But as long as you can see that your center is going to fit pretty much that hole in the middle, you'll be fine. If there's a big gap, and a couple people wrote on the forum that their outside ring was significantly larger than their middle, and what was the problem and what should they do? It has to come down to, I'm going to assume that the patterns were printed correctly. That's the first thing that we have, that would make a difference right off the bat, that the patterns needed to be the correct size. But if they're the correct size, then it comes down to seam allowance. And there are many, many seam allowances. And just think about it. If you're off seam allowance, let's say 2 threads on a seam, 2 threads, that's a little tiny amount. But double that because you're off on the bottom fabric as well as the top fabric. So that's now 4 threads. And multiply that by all of those seam allowances, and you can see where the tall building ring could actually grow quite a bit. Then it's likely to grow more than it is to shrink. But that's what you're after. Now, the nice thing is about working with fabric, and that's what we do as quilters, it's not stained glass, and you can ease things to fit. You can move things around a little bit. You can, tuck here and help to get things going. It takes lots of pins to get this secured so that you're able to sew it nice and slowly. The sewing took me almost an hour, and the pinning took well more than an hour. So you don't want to be in a rush when you're doing that, and you don't want to be tired to start with. I got the pieces ready one day by late in the afternoon, and I said, I'm going to hold off till tomorrow to start the pinning. And I came in fresh in the morning when I was ready to go and started all of the pinning. And then sewed. So that whole thing took me from after breakfast till right at lunchtime to get that done. But then when you get it done, you're just so tickled that you've got this section in there. That's a corner, so I put them together in corners there so that I could see that things were going to fit. And that's when I discovered that my Big Ben had scaffolding and decided he was just going to stay that way. This is my piece just thrown on the wall before I got borders in place, and you can see it's wonky. There's a lot of bias on those outside edges, so I just jumped up there on my step stool to get it up on the ladder. When I got the final borders added to it, I took a picture with my granddaughter was here, and this was last summer, and it was amazing. I sent that photograph to the folks at the quilt show who had only seen pictures of the quilt, and every one of them commented it was so much bigger than they thought. Stella was included in that photograph for scale. so you could have an idea. Most everybody thought the quilt was more like 45 inches or so across. And when you saw it with her in it, you could really see, oh my gosh, it's far bigger than we think that it is. The borders, Wendy's instructions tell you to cut the borders from cross grain and then put a seam in them. It's such a busy print if you're using the kit fabric that you don't see the seam at all. And if you prefer to cut your borders on lengthwise grain and had plenty of fabric that you could do that, that would be another option for you to do. You could add a different border as well. I'm going to show you now. Oh, this is my leftovers. This is just the leftover pieces that I had. I had only started with 1/4 yard cuts and then realized pretty quickly that that was not going to be enough. So the company sent me some more fabrics, but not all of them. And of course, the ones that I didn't get were the red that would have been in Big Ben. There was no possibility of me making another brick red Big Ben because I didn't have any more of that. And then that's just the funny photo down here at the bottom with all the leftover chunks. And I still have all those in a bag. I have no idea what I'm going to do with them, but they're laying there somewhere. So let's go to the forum while we're on share my screen. And I know I'm logged into the forum because I see my face over here. And I'm not sure if you noticed it or not, but in the last week I've added Block of the Month 2022 Garden Party Down Under. We've got new, there's a couple of topics going there. So let's look at Color My World back in the forum here. And let's see. So when I first come to the forum, I usually look to see if there's anything new. I've been on here quite a bit this morning already, so there isn't anything new that I had. But another place you can look is latest forum posts and see what else has been written here. The download heads up. This Marty reminded everybody. She gets kudos for being great to remind everybody, because I certainly have tried to make sure I remind everybody. These patterns are only available to you as a member of the Quilt Show, star member, free through December 31st of this year. After that, all the rights return to the designer, to Wendy Williams. She then can teach it. She can sell the pattern. We no longer have any right to use that pattern or to give the pattern to anybody for any reason. So please download or save or print or whatever you need to do to have these things. Even, hard drives crash and thumb drives crash, and we understand that, but we still, after December 31st of this year, we no longer have the right to give you anything. So that's just something that I wanted you to see there. And my little guy just changed on me, so I didn't like that. Color My World, your finish here. So let's look at those. This is the place to put some pictures. And someone asked me, will the videos and the instructions, my blogs stay up indefinitely as long as Blogspot exists. My blogs remain there. And the videos are going to stay too. But it's the pattern instructions and anything from that the designer has provided that we no longer have rights to. All right, so here's a pretty one. This Linda says, complete is better than perfect. Finished is better than perfect is one of the things that I say. I think that looks fantastic. And that light border really lets those buildings show. I think that is just wonderful. Here's one by Brenda. She said, I didn't realize until I looked at the photo that I have a 1/4 turn to my Mariner Star. So I had to go back and look and see what she was talking about. What she's talking about is that this Mariner's Star, instead of being directly straight up and down, and that one also is a 1/4 turn, has a little turn to it. And she said, I can't decide if I should unpick and resew that final seam around the outer roads or just leave it. I think I'll probably just leave it. I think she should have heard everyone on the internet screaming, no, just leave it. Only she will notice it, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I think it looks just fine. Carol B, the Carol B is getting lots of kudos from lots of people. She's making hers out of wool. That is just amazing to me, and it is beautiful. She has really personalized this quilt a lot, with homes that they've lived in and buildings that mean something to her. The city hall I have to tell you this. First up was the city hall in the town I was born and have lived in my entire life. The clock face shows the time I was born. Now that is really personalizing the quilt. So Carol, we love it. It's just wonderful. Here's another one, except for the outer borders, the top is complete. And you can see that you could decide if you wanted to not make it any bigger or make that outer border smaller than what Wendy's pattern calls for. It's just, it looks pretty good right there. I think I'd add a little bit of a border, but, and here's another one there. She said, I can't believe I finished Color My World. Everybody who finishes, you deserve a humongous pat on the back. Here's another one with the St. Louis Arch and a Cardinal baseball in the upper left. This one was made as a wall hanging for her daughter's new home, so she's got that one done. And so that's just a way that you can see some different things. I do look over here when I for the latest forum post to see what's going on and other places. Instead of having to go back to forum and click and see all of these different categories and guess which one I want to be in, I'll just show you this one while I'm here, and then I'll go back to the my webcam again. This one I have the big reveal coming soon. So we have this post that was that when it was decided that Alex, who couldn't stand it anymore, was going to show yours. And so Helen took a screenshot from that and put it up there. So a friend of mine did the same thing on Facebook so people could see. That is Irene Blank's version of the quilt. And then I went ahead. Someone started asking me about picking fabrics. We're going to talk about that in December 1st when Alex and I we do a special reveal, and I will have a blog that'll come up later after that. Suzanne couldn't help herself. She got started already pulling fabrics. It is such a scrappy quilt, and I put a picture of mine up there. I'm going to click on it bigger and you can see it, and that's, of course, it's over there beside me. And I had a wonderful time picking fabrics. I have a sinful amount of fabric, and it wasn't hard at all to pick fabrics, and I'm going to show you how I did it when we get started with mine. I'm eager to see the kit. I haven't received it yet, but we're working on that, so I'm very eager to see what our kit's going to look like, and as soon as I have it, I'll be able to show that to you too. Anyway, so that's what's coming up. Let me go back now to my webcam. Okay. All right, let me see what else I wanted to talk to you about. And there are a few people designing their own skyscrapers. The St. Louis Arch, one of my students did that, and I put a picture of hers up, and somebody right away started saying, please send it to me, please send the pattern. And I gave you her email address. She's not on the forum at much, but she's more than willing to share her pattern. If you wanted it, you'd have to write to her directly. Got that reminder. Good. Okay. All right. Let's go see if there's any questions. I hope there are some questions. All right. Okay, there is Carol from New Hampshire. I can't believe it's almost done. Yep, the year has gone. Massachusetts, Gainesville, Texas, San Antonio. Mary asked, should the seams be pressed open? It comes down to personal preference. Some people like to press them open. I knew I was going to do a lot of stitch in the ditch. But some of these pieces are pretty narrow. So there are times when, yes, I press some open and times when I press to the side. No one's going to see your seams when it's all done. Just trying to be consistent and in a way that makes sense is the good way to go there. So we got Rose says, good morning from Washington, and great quilts. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Let me go back there. I'll look again here before we end up. I don't really know that you could see mine much better. The photograph is a good one that's on the in the forum there if you wanted to see mine, and the photo on the also of Irene's. So she said she used like 80 fabrics, and I'm pretty sure I did too. I had a great time just playing in my stash picking colors that I wanted to do. So we're going to have a lot more information for you about the block of the month and some really good alternative methods to put this together if needle turn applique is not your thing. We're going to have some alternatives, as I said, and we'll talk much more about that. I don't want to steal Alex's thunder. We're going to be doing the big reveal here on December 1st. So I'll go back one more time and see if we've got any more questions. You can always write me on the forum. I check the forum all the time, and so that's not a problem. Oh, good. Lisa said, I'm so excited about the 2022 block of the month that I finally pulled the trigger on joining. Thanks, Quilt Show. Well, Lisa, that's a ding, 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 ding. That's exactly why we do these things. So, the block of the month is something that the Quilt Show provides free to their star members, but but they have to pay for that to the designer. This is not, the designer doesn't do it free. The designer, it makes an exclusive quilt just for us, and we're the only ones that have it for this year. And they provide that as an added bonus. I've been a member of, a star member of the Quilt Show since the day I could sign up in 2007 because I believed in Ricky and Alex. And it's been the best money that I spent on, if we've learned anything in the last almost 2 years of being home, or a year and a half, that having access to these kinds of classes, and what a lot of people don't realize, if you're a star member, if you join today as a star member, you have access to every show that has ever been aired, all the way back for 14 years to 2007. Some of those teachers aren't traveling to teach anymore. They're wonderful people. Sue Garman was a guest twice, and so you can actually see her shows, as well as so many other things. The search button for the shows is great. You can find all kinds of things. One of the blogs that I'll write in December that I'll have up and we'll have as a reference is a variety of shows that have aired in the last 14 years that are pertinent to the 2022 block of the month. You want to learn how to do needle turn applique by specialists who can show you? There's a show or two or three for that. You want to do fused applique, you want to do turned edge machine applique, and here's the resources where you can find those things right there on our show. All of that included in your membership. So the great thing about the current situation is that this year, 2021, through December 31st, not only do we have the Color My World block of the month, but we have Janet Stone's A to Z for You and Me. That one also goes away. That was the 2014 block of the month, and they were able to get permission from Janet to use that again this year. So there's a second block of the month where those patterns, again, they're available. All you have to do is download and or print them and save them, and you've gotten that for free instead of having to buy them at great cost to buy a year's worth of patterns. And then, of course, the new one is going to start here in January, our 2022 block of the month. So there's, I've often said, and when asked about why should I join the Quilt Show, that if my money suddenly became extremely tight and I had to be very, very careful with what money I spent on quilting, the two things that would be the last to go are my membership to my local guild and the Quilt Show membership. So, and I get verklempt about that because it's just, we're a community of quilters, and it's great to see there's people from all over the world working on this quilt, and that's just amazing. And it's just really a great way for us to learn and share from each other. So I'll look one more time, see if there's any other questions, and if not, we will be signing off here. Okay, Jeannie said she tried to find Janet's pattern but couldn't find it. It's under block of the month 2014. Let me go see if I can find it. Are there more pattern pieces and directions in November to 7, or do we have everything? Yes, you have everything. November had 2 of the skyscrapers. December had the other 2, and December also had a section on assembly of the quilt from Wendy. Robin says, taking a year off from block of the month for next year, Color My World almost did me in. Well, Robin, I hope that you'll recover. Don't want to have that. We don't want any of these to do you in, but it was a challenge for many, many people. So, and John's just put up a link to the block of the month for 2014, the Janet Stone one. So, good job there, Captain John, helping from the other end of the country here. Okay, and the great thing about the blocks of the month is that not everyone appeals to every person. I haven't made them all since the beginning. I've just made the ones that really spoke to me. And so it's perfectly fine. I know when Color My World came out, I had a couple people send me private emails and going, I'm really sorry, but it's just not my thing. And that's fine. They're not supposed to be the perfect thing for everybody. Look how different they are. So it's just a matter of finding what it is that you like about them. The great thing about next year is there's so many great, that middle is just wonderful all by itself. And so you may start and say, okay, I've got this far and I'm good with that. But there's so much to see and do and learn with these blocks of the month, even if you're not making the actual project. There's every quilt we make teaches us something. And so that's the good thing there. So if you're U.S. and you're planning to have a great Thanksgiving next week, I certainly hope that all works out, and that we're talking about travel issues. So I hope everybody gets safely where they're going, and we start to be able to get back together again with family. And I know that we'll be having turkey here at my house. I love making a big turkey dinner, and my husband's not a fan of leftovers, but he'll just have to deal with it because I really like it. You get all the flavor and very little of the work when you have the leftovers. So that's going to wrap it up for today, and kind of going to wrap up the live about the Color My World. When we come back again on December 3rd, I'm hopeful that we'll be ready to start talking in detail about Garden Party Down Under, made by Irene Blank. So until December 3rd,